One of the ongoing debates in the digital transformation space is how to address as-is versus to-be business processes. That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And when embarking on a digital transformation, one of the biggest questions we get from clients is, how do I address my as-is processes? How do I address my to-be processes? How much time do I spend on them? Do I spend time on them? Those are just a few questions that come up, and a lot of organizations struggle with how to approach business process management and business process improvement. So what I want to talk about today is how to address this whole notion and concept of as-is and to-be, and how to embed that within your digital transformation. Before I dive into the how we address as-is and to-be business process management, it's helpful to understand, first of all, why is business process management so important? And one of the problems with the digital transformation space is you have software vendors out there that are sort of downplaying the importance of business process management. They'll tell you that you don't need to worry about either as-is or to-be because their software will tell you what your future state's going to look like. You don't need to worry about your as-is because you're going to get rid of it. You don't need to worry about your future state because their software is going to tell you how your processes should work. This is a big mistake, and it's a big misleading statement that software vendors often make. And the reason for that is because your business processes and your future state processes and business requirements should define and inform what types of technologies you deploy, how you deploy those technologies, and ultimately how your business processes are going to improve. And if you don't spend the time to define what your current and future state is, you're not going to understand what that blueprint is for how you're going to deploy new technologies, new process improvements, and also how you're going to enable organizational change management. So for those reasons, you can really think of business process management as sort of the foundation, the blueprint for how you're going to deploy technology, process, and people changes throughout your organization. You may be asking yourself, do I need to worry about my as-is business processes? If I'm just going to change them, why do I need to think about it? Why do we need to analyze it? Well, here's the reason why. First of all, you can't get to your future state without understanding where you are today. You really do need to understand what you're doing today, what's working well, those things that you know you want to retain and build on, and also the things that aren't working well, those targeted areas that you want to improve. If you don't go through that exercise, you're not going to be able to define a clear process improvement and technology roadmap to get there. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't want to overanalyze your current state. You don't want to get down to the transactional level of which buttons you push, what fields you enter. That's way too much detail. But you can do an end-to-end business process that looks at how you're using technologies today, what the processes look like, what people's roles and responsibilities are, and really assess the current state within that context. Now, one of the tools we use at Third Stage is something called business process mining. Business process mining is a fantastic way to really understand your current state, and not just in terms of the qualitative conversation around what processes are working and what's not, but more of a quantitative discussion around these are the actual metrics around how our business processes are flowing, how long it takes for an end-to-end process on average to be completed, where the steps are breaking down, where the variations are happening, where the exceptions are, and it really paints a visual picture, a literal visual picture of how your business processes work today. And so business process mining is a great example of a tool you can use to really understand the lay of the land, the landscape of where you are today, so that you can define a future state based on where you are today, what's working well, what's not working well, and what you could improve for the future. Now, as part of this exercise of understanding your current state, you're inevitably going to identify ways that you might potentially improve your business processes. So you're going to identify the bottlenecks, the pain points, the inefficiencies, the manual entry of data, the rework, the quality issues along the way. All those things are things that are going to come to the surface as you assess and evaluate your current state business processes. You're also going to identify those things that are working really well. These things we do well, and these are key parts of our business model and key aspects of our operating model that we know we want to retain. And they're sort of deal breakers in that if we don't address these areas and retain this stuff within our operating model, that's going to be a problem. So that's why the current state is important, and that's why the current state really enables you to identify what those future state potential improvements are. Now, another common exercise that happens within defining your future state improvements is that you identify variations in your business processes. So if you've grown through organic growth throughout the world and or you've grown through acquisitions or other sorts of growth as an organization, you've probably ended up with a bunch of business processes that look very different in many cases. So part of the business process improvement exercise is designed to identify ways that you might create more of a common operating model, common standardized processes. Not that you have to do it for your entire organization for all functions and all processes, but there might be certain ones that you decide these are low-hanging fruits or areas that we know we want to improve and standardize and create more of a common business process for our organization. So that's another thing to look for. And then on the flip side, you also want to look at areas that you know you want to retain a certain amount of flexibility, decentralization, localization, whatever it may be. There's typically not a one-size-fits-all answer for an entire organization, so you want to make sure that you identify what it is you want those business process improvements to be that make the most sense for you in your future state. Now, once you've done everything I've talked about so far, now you're ready to define what is that future state. You've looked at your current state, you've identified the things that are working well, the pain points, the bottlenecks, the inefficiencies, the manual processes. You've identified opportunities for improvement, things you might want to standardize, or things you know you might want to localize. So now it's time to define what is that future state? What does that business process look like? What are those end-to-end process flows going to look like? And that's really sort of the capstone in this entire exercise, is starting with your current state, your as-is processes, and evolving iteratively to the point where you're now at your future state to-be processes. And this should not only look at what your business processes are going to be, but what are the roles and responsibilities within your future state, because ultimately that's going to drive your organizational change management plan. And also another benefit of defining your future state is that you end up with a solid set of requirements that will help you define, evaluate, and select the best technologies for your organization. And those same requirements will also become the foundation for how you deploy the technology. So the work you do up front on business process definition of your future state is not only going to help you select the right software, but it's going to help you make sure that you deploy the software in a way that enables those process improvements. The final thing I'll mention is that future state also helps you with your change management plan. It helps you identify where the gaps are between where you are today in your current state, where you're going with your future state, and who's affected by that, how they're affected, how jobs, roles, and responsibilities are going to change. So defining your future to-be state is a critical input into your overall organizational change management strategy as well. Now, to get started on this whole journey of defining your as-is and your to-be, you want to make sure you leverage some tools that might be at your disposal. First of all, the question often comes up of how do we start with our as-is state? You can certainly start with a clean slate whiteboard, sit in a conference room and talk about how your business processes look and how the process starts, where it finishes, and where the breakdowns are. But there's other tools at your disposal that might help. I already talked about the concept of business process mining, the software that will help you draw out of your current systems where the processes are broken, where the opportunities for improvement are, where the variations are. But you also have other tools, like, for example, APQC is a nonprofit organization. If you go to apqc.org, they're an organization that provides a technology agnostic business process framework for a number of different industries and a number of different functions. And that business process framework can be a great way to start with something that you can throw darts at. So you can say, for example, what's our procure-to-pay process? Let's start with a straw man, a starting point of what a typical procure-to-pay process looks like, and let's talk about how our processes look within that context. That can be a great tool if you're a member of APQC, and that's something that we use within our consulting offering for our clients. The other thing to think about is who are the stakeholders that are going to be involved in helping us define our as-is and to-be. You want to make sure that you have key stakeholders such as mid-level management as well as frontline employees that are involved in these processes. And unfortunately, you probably can't include every single person within your organization, but you want to make sure you have a good cross-functional representation on your process team that can help you define those as-is, future state, business processes, and business requirements. And then finally, another thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to overanalyze your business processes. Certainly your current state is something you don't want to spend a lot of time overanalyzing, and even your future state. You do want to define it to the point where it does depend on what technology you use, and then you want to stop until you've picked this technology and then you go to deploy it. So in other words, if you think of a very high-level business process up here and then a super granular, detailed transactional process down here, you want to end up somewhere in the middle early in your project. So if you get to the point where you're bumping up against the point where it really depends on what technology you're using and how you deploy it, That's where you stop and say, we're going to get to the rest of the details after we start to deploy technology. But you want to get to that level of detail as part of your evaluation and business planning perspective, so that you can then pick the technology, develop a clear strategy for how to deploy the technology, and then create the additional details from there. So I hope this has provided some additional context for how to address business processes, both the as-is and the to-be aspects of business processes within your digital transformation. I encourage you to check out some of the additional links I've included below, other resources that will help you through your digital transformation journey. In particular, and for example, I've included a link to our digital transformation report, which provides best practices for how to deploy technology, including business process types of work, as well as other things like how different software systems compare to one another, what some of the best technologies are for different industries and different functions. So I encourage you to check out that and other resources below. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.